Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the biting chill of Norway's high mountains, where something ancient and impossible has slept beneath the snow for more than 1,000 years. Imagine trudging through a blizzard so thick that even your thoughts feel muffled, and then catching a glimpse of wood, old curved and somehow deliberate, jutting from the ice like a whale's rib breaching from a frozen sea. That's how this story begins, with a shape that shouldn't exist where it was found, far above the fjords, far above reason itself. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere chilly, or somewhere warm enough to make Norway's frost sound like a fairy tale, post your location and your local time in the comments below. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now find yourself a cozy seat or a soft bed, let your mind begin to unwind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The discovery happened by accident, as most wonderful disasters do. Two hikers, one named Lars and the other Ingrid, were exploring a ridge above the Jotunheimen range, roughly 1,900 meters and 6,200 feet above sea level. The wind there could peel the laughter off your face, and yet they climbed for the view. What they found instead was history crusted with rime. A half circle of wood, blackened by age, poked out of the ice, stubbornly refusing to be ignored. At first they thought it might be part of a cabin, perhaps an old Sami reindeer shelter. But there were no walls, no nails, no straight lines. Just that graceful curve, unmistakably the hull of a ship. It arched upward from the glacier like the back of a sleeping leviathan, silent and surreal. Ingrid joked that it looked like the Vikings parked it here and forgot to pay for parking. Lars didn't laugh. He was too busy brushing away snow, revealing something carved, something deliberate. Within days, archaeologists were flown in by helicopter landing on a nearby flat of rock. The operation felt almost absurd, people in bright orange parkas setting up tents and scanners beside an object meant to sail, not freeze. The first mainstream historical fact, quickly followed wood samples, confirmed it was indeed Viking-era oak, likely from the 9th or early 10th century. That placed it around the same time as the Oseberg ship, one of the finest and most ornate Viking vessels ever discovered. But the Oseberg had been found in a burial mound near the sea. This one sat nearly 2,000 meters and 6,500 feet above it. No fjord could have reached this high. No flood, no storm, no ice age was known to have carried a seaworthy vessel up here. And yet here it was, half entombed, half emerging like a dream that refused to fade after waking. Some joked that it must have been the first Viking airship. Others wondered whether it had been dragged there intentionally, though that would mean hauling several tons of oak through mountain passes steep enough to humble a goat. The first quirky tidbit came when one of the field scientists noted that part of the timber seemed slightly singed, as though scorched from within. Lightning strike, said the geologist. Fire ritual, muttered the folklore expert. Tourist barbecue gone wrong, added one of the students before remembering this thing had been buried for centuries. When the ice around the bow was chipped away, they uncovered traces of iron rivets still clinging to the frame, tiny corroded rings holding history together. The site was immediately sealed off. Drones mapped it. Sensors monitored thawing patterns, and the Norwegian Cultural Heritage Directorate debated whether to move the ship or let it rest in place. Historians still can't agree on which choice would preserve it better. The cold protects, but every human breath warms the air, hastening decay. Meanwhile, the news leaked online and people began trekking toward the region despite warnings. A few clips circulated of visitors claiming to hear the sea when the wind gusted through the mountain valley. One even swore they caught the faint echo of a war horn at sunset, though that might just have been a hiker's thermos whistling. The mountains themselves seemed to guard the wreck with indifference. The peaks loomed white and blue, their shadows stretching like frozen sails across the snowfields. Archaeologists camped nearby and began the slow process of laser scanning the exposed timbers. Beneath the surface, radar detected the shape of a hull, roughly 22 meters and 72 feet long. That made it comparable to a full-sized Viking warship capable of carrying 30 men or more. How such a vessel ended up on a mountain instead of in a fjord remains one of Norway's strangest riddles. Some suspected glacial movement, perhaps the ship had been buried near a prehistoric shoreline and lifted over time by ice and tectonics. Others suggested human ritual, maybe an offering to the gods abandoned at the roof of the world. Ingrid, the original hiker, returned once during the excavation and brought thermos coffee for the team. She said she couldn't stop thinking about that first moment, how it felt like stumbling onto a ghost mid-dream. Lars, meanwhile, refused all interviews. A friend later claimed he had nightmares of being on that ship again, though he never explained what again meant. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, the temperature plummeted to nearly minus 20 degrees Celsius, and -4 degrees Fahrenheit. The air felt crystalline, almost brittle, and as the archaeologists turned off their lights, the ship's curved shadow merged with the mountain's two ancient shapes, resting together under a sky bright with cold stars. What no one noticed yet were the patterns forming where the ice was melting lines that seemed to spiral almost like runes curling around the wooden arc, as though the mountain itself were writing back. It would take another week before anyone realised what those marks hinted at. The story, as you might expect, only deepens from here, winding downward into both the soil and the imagination. Morning in the high mountains begins not with warmth, but with surrender. The archaeologists wake to the sound of canvas snapping in the wind, the hiss of snow grinding against tent flaps, and the muffled creak of ancient wood beneath the ice. The ship, still half buried, looks different each day, its dark hull shimmering with frost, its curves tightening as the cold deepens. They call it Istraka now, the ice dragon, though even the name feels too deliberate, as if the ship has already earned its legend. Beneath their boots, sensors hum, faintly measuring temperature, shifts, moisture, seepage, and the slow sigh of ice melting around the vessel. Each time the sun rises, brief and pale, the snow loosens its grip just enough for them to dig another few centimetres, or roughly 1 inch. It's painstaking work, like unwrapping a ghost that might not want to be unwrapped. The excavation leader, Dr. Solveig Lund, squints at the readings on her handheld monitor. The permafrost layer below them measures nearly 5 metres and 16 feet, deep solid ice formed over 1,000 years ago. That means the ship has been locked in place since the Viking Age itself. If this wood was frozen when Harold Fairhair ruled, she says we're about to speak with his century directly. The mainstream historical fact here, Viking ships were marvels of engineering clinker-built meaning, overlapping oak planks fastened with iron rivets that flexed with the waves. Such craftsmanship allowed them to travel from Norway to Constantinople, and even as far as North America. Yet these ships belong to the sea. No record, no saga, no local tradition has ever placed one so high in the Scandinavian mountains. The team's maps of known Viking routes show nothing even close to this location. A journalist from Oslo jokes that the ship might have sailed during an unusually optimistic flood. The locals aren't laughing. Down in the nearest valley, an old shepherd tells a visiting reporter that his grandfather used to warn children about the ship that climbs the sky when storms are angry. Nobody took it seriously until now. As they dig deeper, the archaeologists uncover ribs of the hull perfectly intact, preserved by the cold. Each plank still smells faintly of tar and salt, as if remembering the sea it once rode. Solveig runs her gloved hand along the wood and feels the faint pattern of tool marks, regular, deliberate, precise. The grooves suggest the work of a skilled craftsman, using a broad axe and draw knife, not random damage. One researcher notes that the planks were bent using steam, a hallmark of shipyards near Oslo fjord, nearly 200 kilometres and 124 miles south. How did it end up here, hundreds of kilometres inland and nearly 2,000 metres and 6,500 feet higher than any known Viking harbour? To test the possibility of glacial movement, the geologists take core samples of surrounding ice. The results leave them puzzled. The layers show consistent accumulation, but no evidence of major drift. Simply put, the glacier never moved the ship uphill. It was placed here deliberately, or else carried by something no natural force can explain. Historians continue to debate the how and why, though one quietly admits that if the ship's full hull lies below, it would be the best preserved Viking vessel ever found. The quirky tidbit comes from a technician monitoring ground radar. Late one night, as the wind howls through the valley, his sensors pick up a strange echo pattern beneath the bow, a hollow chamber that resonates differently than solid ice. When they amplify the signal, the playback produces a faint rhythmic sound, 4 beats, then silence, then 4 again. It's interference, someone mutters. Ice movement, another insists. The technician shakes his head. No, he says softly, that's oars. They repeat the test several times, moving the scanner slightly each time. The result remains faint echoes, as if something deep below still remembers rowing. Skeptics suggest equipment malfunction. Believers quietly glance toward the horizon, where fog curls like steam from an invisible sea. The first drone footage from above captures the full shape of the excavation pit. The ship rests at a diagonal, its stern slightly higher than its bow, as though climbing the mountain slope. Around it, the ice forms concentric ripples, frozen waves of time. Solveig presents the footage at a press conference, ending with a line that becomes instantly famous. If the sea could dream, this is what it would look like when it wakes. The temperature drops again that night to minus 25 degrees Celsius and minus 13 degrees Fahrenheit. The team seals their instruments in heated boxes. Somewhere deep in the ice sensors detect a soft, cracking noise, the sound of timber expanding after centuries of silence. Solveig feels both awe and unease. Wood should not groan like that unless something alive were moving. During a break, one of the younger archaeologists jokes that they might find a Viking crew frozen inside like those chocolate bars with surprise fillings. Solveig chuckles and tells him not to jinx the mission. Still, she privately wonders if they might indeed find human remains. Ship burials were common in Norse culture, though usually beneath mounds, not on mountain ridges. Another debate erupts in the research tent: could this be a ritual site? In Old Norse belief, mountains often symbolised gateways between worlds. Placing a ship here might represent sending it toward the gods. But why a real ship, asks one skeptic. Symbolism could be achieved with carvings. Someone else replies, maybe they thought the gods preferred first-class seating. Historians still argue whether the find represents a lost expedition, a spiritual offering, or something far stranger. For every scientific explanation, another half-mystical rumour crawls out of the ice stories of monks who fled Viking raids and brought relics to hidden sanctuaries, or sagas describing heroes who sought a sky sea beyond mortal reach. By day's end, the crew finally expose enough of the hull to photograph a carved emblem near the prow, a stylized serpent twining around a circle. The serpent's eye is set with what looks like amber still faintly luminous in the grey light. Sunstone motif, Solveig murmurs, referring to the legendary Viking navigation crystal said to reveal the sun through clouds. The symbol might hint at the ship's purpose, perhaps a voyage guided not by stars but by faith or madness. Night falls abruptly in the north. The generator hums, casting orange glow over tents. The ice dragon looms nearby, a silent relic of an age when the world was smaller, yet somehow larger in mystery. The wind sighs through the valley again, and a few swear they hear faint thuds beneath the ice, slow deliberate echoing like the rhythm of distant oars. The next morning Solveig orders a deeper scan of that hollow chamber. What they find will challenge every neat theory they've built so far and led them to the first physical clue that this was no ordinary voyage. By the third week, the excavation camp hums like a small, determined village. The hum of generators mingles with the crunch of snow boots and the slow rhythm of brushes sweeping over ancient wood. The mountain, indifferent as ever, watches silently while humans peel away its icy secrets. The team has now exposed most of the hull, revealing a sleek vessel of 22 metres and 72 feet, its keel astonishingly straight despite the centuries. Each plank fits so tightly it could have been carved yesterday. The air smells faintly of oak and pine resin, and every stroke of the archaeologist's brushes releases a ghost of seawater memory. Dr. Solveig Lund stands at the ship's midpoint, staring at a long fracture line running down the beam. It split while it froze, she murmurs, but the pattern suggests it was already damaged before it reached this place. She gestures toward a narrow indentation scorch marks along one edge. Sea fire. The mainstream historical fact, Viking ships were often burned during funerary rites, a symbolic release of the vessel and its owner to the afterlife. But here the burn marks seem incomplete, like a ceremony interrupted midway. The archaeologist's instruments detect tar residue mingled with charcoal and bits of ash, embedded deep in the wood grain. Dendrochronology tests soon reveal the wood's origin oak felled in southern Scandinavia, around 890 CE, near what is today Denmark. The growth rings match trees found in Jutland, meaning the ship began its life hundreds of kilometres and miles south of where it rests now. That single discovery collapses several theories. It was not built in the mountains, and it didn't originate near any known inland lake. This ship had sailed the open sea. Yet a new puzzle emerges when radiocarbon dating of tar samples returns slightly older, perhaps a full century earlier than the timber itself. Reused pitch suggests one expert. Ancient repair materials, another argues. Or maybe they sealed it with something sacred. Historians continue to debate whether the tar mixture included traces of birch pine or something unknown. The chemical fingerprint doesn't match any known Norse shipyard. Solveig's assistant Emil is the first to notice that the wood emits a strange scent when gently warmed by floodlights. Not tar, not rot, something sharp and metallic. Smells like a forge, he says. Later lab analysis reveals iron-rich dust pressed deep into the pores, almost as if molten metal once splashed across the planks. The quirky tidbit, a metallurgist, identifies it as meteoric iron. the kind used for high-status blades and ceremonial objects. Someone somewhere had sealed this ship with stardust. Under magnification, the timber reveals small indentations near the stern, rows of marks that might once have held decorative bronze studs. Each tiny hole seems spaced with mathematical precision. A pattern emerges, a series of repeating intervals matching the Old Norse calendar's lunar cycle. Solvi wonders aloud, were they measuring time here? One of the students replies, or counting how many times they regretted this trip. The discovery electrifies the academic world. Norway's National Museum sends an additional crew with 3D scanners and hyperspectral cameras. The imagery exposes faint carvings hidden beneath centuries of grime, curving lines, and interlocked symbols. One clearly resembles a serpent swallowing its own tail, the Ouroboros, while another looks like waves or perhaps flames. They record every centimetre, or rather every inch, carefully, though the images seem to shimmer oddly on the monitors. When light hits certain angles, the symbols appear to shift, forming what one observer describes as a map that refuses to stay still. Could these be runes? Not quite. The lines share features with known Elder Futhark inscriptions, but contain curves unknown in Viking script. The linguist on site, Professor Haukson, shakes his head. Either we've discovered a new dialect, he says, or the Vikings were doodling after too much mead. Still, something about the wood feels intentional. The carvings are concentrated near the ship's centre, directly over the keel, as if forming a barrier or seal. Theories multiply. Perhaps the ship carried a relic, or was meant to be entombed where earth and sky meet. The team's drills finally pierce into the hollow chamber beneath the bow. Inside, a fibre-optic camera reveals a narrow compartment lined with tar cloth. Within it lies a bundle of timber fragments, each wrapped tightly in animal hide. Personal effects, asks Emil. Offering, Solveig replies. They decide to open one on site. Inside the hide is a small piece of oak carved, polished, and etched with symbols identical to those on the hull. But this piece has something else, a sliver of gold inlaid into the grain so thin it flickers like trapped sunlight. Melt analysis later confirms it's high-purity Scandinavian gold, the kind reserved for royal ornaments. No coins, no treasure chest, just this deliberate shimmer embedded in the heart of the ship. And yet, despite the growing evidence of craftsmanship, the big question refuses to thaw. How did the vessel ascend a mountain? One glaciologist proposes a radical theory that during a catastrophic avalanche, roughly 1,000 years ago, a frozen fjord might have fractured upward, lifting the ship in a slow-motion surge of ice. Another geologist shakes his head. Impossible. There's no coastal sediment here. Historians still quarrel about whether the ship was dragged intentionally. Ancient Norse sagas mention kings who ordered impossible feats to prove devotion to the gods, dragging stones, pillars, even boats across land. One tale speaks of a ship that sought the sky and found the end of all waves. Most scholars call it allegory, but allegories have a way of hiding truth inside poetry. By late evening, as frost creeps along the tents, Solveig gathers her notes by lantern light. Every fact she writes feels like fiction pretending to be data. She closes her journal, listening to the mountain's quiet hum. Somewhere beneath the ice melt, water trickles whispering through cracks like voices. Before turning in, Emil checks the sensors one last time. The wood's surface temperature has risen by 1 degree Celsius and about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, though no heaters are nearby. Residual sunlight, he shrugs, but the others are asleep when he walks past the hull and notices something odd, faint warmth radiating from the carvings themselves. When he touches the timber, it feels alive, like a heartbeat buried in oak. He steps back quickly, shaking snow from his gloves. Maybe it's his imagination, or maybe the ship's story isn't finished telling itself. By morning, one thing will be undeniable. The ice dragon is changing. By dawn, a thin fog curls along the excavation pit, soft and weightless, as if the mountain itself is exhaling. The camp stirs slowly. The archaeologists move like bundled silhouettes against the milky light. The ice dragon's hull gleams beneath its frost crust, an immense dark crescent set into the snow. Something in its posture feels alive, watchful even. The previous night's faint warmth readings had everyone whispering over breakfast. Solveig dismisses it as sensor drift, but the team can't shake the feeling that the ship is quietly stretching after a long icy sleep. The focus, however, is shifting today. They'll probe deeper inside, opening the first compartment sealed for a millennium. It takes nearly 4 hours of delicate cutting and steaming the permafrost to expose the central hold. The frozen soil yields reluctantly chunk by chunk, like ancient breath escaping from the earth. As the interior finally opens, the archaeologists find an astonishing sight. a cluster of objects preserved so perfectly that time seems to have held its breath around them. There's a faint smell, oak and iron, but also something sweet like burnt honey. At the hold's base lies a scattering of small circular pieces coins, but not just from Norway. Frankish murmurs Solveig, brushing off frost to reveal a silver denier bearing the faint outline of King Charles the Bald. Nearby, a few Arabic dirhams glitter, their Kufic script still crisp. These travelled thousands of kilometres and miles, she says. This ship traded or raided far from home. That's the mainstream historical fact. Viking trade routes stretched astonishing distances connecting Scandinavia to Byzantium and Baghdad. Norse merchants carried walrus, ivory, amber and furs. In return they brought back silk, spices and silver. Yet finding such a collection here, 2,000 metres and 6,500 feet up a mountain, is like discovering seashells on the moon. As Solveig catalogues the coins, Emil uncovers something else. A cluster of amber beads strung on decayed sinew, each bead carved with miniature spirals. Protective charms, the folklorist suggests. But one bead glows faintly under ultraviolet light, revealing a shape trapped inside the perfect outline of a small winged insect, golden and whole. The team exchanges glances. The insect doesn't match any known Baltic amber fossils. A trick of the light, Emil mutters, but no one quite believes it. At the stern they find fragments of woven cloth threads dyed deep red and faint indigo. Textile analysis later identifies it as wool blended with silk likely imported from the eastern trade routes. The pattern, though, is unique, two intertwining serpents biting each other's tails. Solveig traces the design with her gloved hand. It's almost like a warning, she says softly. The quirky tidbit comes when one of the conservators opens a small wooden box sealed with pitch. Inside lies something completely unexpected, a lump of crystallized resin, pale blue in colour. Lab tests later identify it as a mixture of spruce sap and what appears to be finely ground quartz. Some in the team half-jokingly call it Viking superglue, but one chemist points out it closely resembles compounds used in primitive optical instruments, like a lens, Solveig asks. The chemist nods uncertainly. Perhaps something to focus light. By afternoon the crew has unearthed half a dozen more containers. One holds bits of charcoal and bone wrapped in thin birch bark. Another contains what looks like dried herbs still faintly aromatic. The botanist recognises juniper and mugwort, both used in Norse rituals for purification and prophecy. A faint inscription etched on the container reads Sjofnablot, possibly referring to a blessing of journeys. Historians still dispute whether such rituals were performed aboard ships or only at temples, but the presence of these herbs adds another layer of wonder and unease. It suggests the ship's final voyage was more ceremonial than commercial. Then, just when the daylight begins to fade, they find something that halts. Everyone at the very centre of the hold lies a wooden chest bound with rusted iron bands. The wood is almost black and the lock has long corroded away. Carefully, they remove layers of ice and frost until the lid creaks open. Inside rests a jumble of objects that make no obvious sense together. A small bronze mirror with a cracked surface. A half-melted lump of glass shaped like an eye. A length of rope braided with alternating horsehair and when-tested human hair. And wrapped in a thin wool cloth a short sword blade with no hilt, its metal dark but sharp enough to catch the light like water. The sword is puzzling. Metallurgical analysis will later reveal it was forged with steel of unusually high carbon content, too pure for 9th century Scandinavia. Out of time, Emil murmurs, or out of place, Solveig corrects. Some whisper that it might have been traded from the east, maybe even from Persia. Others wonder whether it was symbolic part of a ritual dismantling of weapons before burial. The strangest item, though, lies nestled beneath the sword, a small wooden disc with radiating lines etched around a central hole. A Viking sun compass, perhaps the kind used to locate the sun's position on cloudy days. Yet this one is different. Instead of a carved shadow line, it's embedded with a shard of transparent crystal, possibly Iceland's spar, the legendary sunstone. When Solveig lifts it toward the weak northern light, the crystal refracts a perfect cross-shaped glow, even through thick cloud. For a moment everyone is silent. The air itself seems to vibrate. The crystal flickers once like a heartbeat and then dims. Later that night, Solveig writes in her log, "Every object seems to belong somewhere else. Different lands, different purposes, yet gathered here like pilgrims meeting at the end of the world." She closes her notebook and listens to the snow drift against the tent. Outside, the ice dragon sits bathed in moonlight, its ribs casting long shadows that ripple across the frost like waves. At around midnight, one of the motion sensors triggers briefly. The team checks the monitor, nothing visible, just faint movement around the hull like settling snow. But when Emil steps outside to inspect, he swears. He hears a low rhythmic creaking, the sound of oars in distant water. He laughs, nervously, blames the wind and returns inside. Still, the data recorded that night shows a sudden temperature rise inside the cargo hold by 2 degrees Celsius and about 4 degrees Fahrenheit, an impossible fluctuation given the ambient cold. The ship, it seems, is remembering warmth. When morning comes, the sunlight reveals fresh cracks in the ice near the keel. Long twisting fractures that look almost like writing. Not random at all, but deliberate patterns curling toward the bow. The team has no idea yet that those markings will soon lead them to the next revelation in the runes that no one should have been able to carve under that frozen wood. By the 5th week, the camp has become a strange mixture of laboratory and legend. Solar panels glitter beside tents made of bright synthetic fabric, all surrounding a ship built a millennium before electricity existed. Snow falls gently, a quiet applause from the mountain, as if it approves of this unlikely congregation of past and present. After days spent cataloguing the curious cargo, the amber, the gold-inlaid timber, the crystal sunstone, Dr. Solveig Lund and her team now turn toward the question everyone whispers about after dark who brought these objects here, and why, one evening as they huddle over the flickering blue of a laptop, Solveig presents an idea that draws silence. If this was a trade vessel, she says its crew never made it home, but if it was an expedition, they might have been searching for something. She clicks to the next slide, a scanned parchment from a monastery archive in Trondheim. It's a fragment written in Latin around the year 1000, translated loosely as "Men of the North sought the stair that leads from the sea to the sky, where no bird can fly and no ship can sail." The monks labelled it a fable. But when Solveig overlays a map of the described landmarks, the lines lead suspiciously close to the Jotunheimen Range, the same region where the ice dragon now rests. The mainstream historical fact is that Norse seafarers of that period were among the most daring explorers in human history. They reached Iceland, Greenland, even the coasts of North America. Archaeological finds at Lonso Meadows prove they crossed the Atlantic centuries before Columbus. But this parchment suggests something else entirely, a journey not outward, but upward. The linguist Hauksson examines the text, frowning. The phrase "stair that leads from the sea to the sky" might be poetic for a fjord surrounded by steep cliffs he offers, or it could refer to an actual ascent. Solveig half smiles. Then we'd better hope they packed snowshoes. The team begins cross-referencing other medieval writings, combing through sagas and lesser-known monkish notes. A recurring phrase emerges in the Norse Islendingasaga Himminsjaferd, roughly the journey of the heaven seer. Most scholars translate it as spiritual vision, but an obscure 14th century commentary from Iceland describes it as the voyage of men who sought the border where clouds have weight. The quirky tidbit arrives when a historian from Bergen emails Solveig late one night. A forgotten letter in the National Archives references a dragon ship that vanished among the mountains. The writer, an Icelandic monk named Eirika, claimed that 5 Vikings arrived at his monastery in 932 CE, half-starved, insisting they had seen a sea above the clouds. They left again, taking with them a compass of glass and a relic described as light, frozen into stone. The monks thought them delirious. None returned. Solveig can't sleep that night. She reads the translation over and over, tracing every phrase with her finger, as if it might suddenly rearrange itself into truth. "Light frozen into stone," she murmurs. "The sunstone." At the next morning briefing, she shares her findings. Some of the younger researchers grin, half excitement, half skepticism. So what they tried to sail into the sky on jokes, maybe Solveig says softly, or maybe they believed the gods lived where the sea ends. Historians continue to debate whether the Norse actually conducted ritual expeditions into remote mountains. Some sources describe blot sacrifices performed on peaks as acts of offering to Odin, whose hall was said to sit beyond the clouds, yet no ship burial has ever been documented in such terrain. The team's drone footage expands the excavation perimeter. Melt channels lead away from the ship, as if it once rested in a shallow pool that later froze solid. Emil suggests it might have been deliberately flooded water carried up from a nearby glacier, then allowed to freeze as a preservation rite. "Who carries buckets of water up a mountain?" asks Solveig, half amused. Emil shrugs. "People who believe the gods were thirsty." That afternoon, a courier helicopter drops off supplies, and with it an unmarked envelope forwarded from the Norwegian Folklore Institute. Inside is a copy of an old Sami legend recorded in the 1800s, long dismissed as myth. It speaks of sky sailors who came during the long night bringing fire and iron, then vanished after their ship burned the air. The local elders called the place Gavatun, the place where the sea climbed the mountain. Solveig circles the phrase in her notebook until the ink smudges. The pattern is too strong to ignore. Over and over across cultures, across centuries, ships that ascend, lights that vanish, crews that never return. That night the wind rises sharply. The tents tremble. Emil wakes to a distant groan, like wood shifting, followed by a hollow knock that seems to echo beneath the ice. He steps outside, flashlight in hand. Snow flurries swirl, reflecting his beam in chaotic spirals. Then he hears it, a whispering faint but distinct, carried by the wind. It sounds like voices speaking Old Norse, a language he barely understands but has heard often enough in readings. He catches fragments: Fjord, Himin, Ljos, Journey, Sky, Light. He backs away, heartbeat quickening. Just the wind, he mutters, though the words come out thin. When he returns to his tent, Solveig is already awake, staring at the same darkness. "You heard it too?" she asks quietly. Emil nods. The next morning the sound has stopped, but something else has appeared, faint symbols etched across the newly thawed section of hull. They're not runes, too fluid, too curved. When photographed under infrared, the marks align with constellations visible only from the North Atlantic in the early 10th century. A map, perhaps, or a farewell. Solveig touches one symbol shaped like an open spiral. "It looks like the Milky Way," she whispers, as if they were charting heaven, not Earth. By evening, the team gathers around the ship's bow as the sky burns with sunset. Somewhere far below them, the fjords shimmer endless mirrors for fading light. Maybe Emil says half to himself they weren't lost at all. Maybe they arrived exactly where they meant to. The others fall silent. In the distance, the mountain groans, ice cracking, stone shifting. A sound like a long, slow exhale rises from beneath the ship, almost human. The ice dragon, it seems, still remembers its crew. The next morning dawns grey and still, as if the mountain itself is holding its breath. Fog coils around the excavation site, thick as wool, muffling sound and light. From above, the camp looks like a cluster of flickering candles adrift in a sea of cloud. Inside that pale silence, the ice dragon rests half exposed, its dark hull gleaming with frozen dew. Dr. Solveig Lund wakes early, drawn by something she can't explain. The mist feels alive, each breath heavy with the taste of cold metal and pine. As she approaches the ship, she notices faint trails of moisture sliding down the wood, not from melting snow, but from within, as though the hull itself is sweating. Emil joins her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Still no wind," he murmurs. Solveig shakes her head. Their voices sound swallowed, their breath visible in the icy air. They stand for a moment in silence, watching their exhalations drift toward the ship, merging with the fog. Then they see it. Just beneath the blackened planks, lines, faint but deliberate, curling through the frost. They move like ghosts of writing, appearing and fading with the shifting mist. Solveig kneels, brushes away ice crystals, and gasps softly. "Runes," she whispers. The mainstream historical fact: Vikings carved runes not only for communication but for magic and memory. The Elder Futhark script used from the 2nd to 8th centuries, and its later form, the Younger Futhark, often appeared on stones, weapons and ships. But these symbols don't match either. Their curves are too soft, too fluid, as though written in a language meant for water rather than wood. Could be stylized, says Hauksson, the linguist, setting up his camera. He captures dozens of high-resolution images before the fog shifts and the carvings vanish again. When they study the images later, they find patterns, spirals, intersecting circles, and one striking phrase that repeats along the beam: Himminsjö, Himmenfjord, Sky Sea, Heaven Voyage. The archaeologists glance at each other. Coincidence, Emil suggests. Solveig smiles faintly. "You're still hoping for one, aren't you?" The runes continue to appear intermittently over the next hours, emerging wherever the mist thickens, as though drawn by humidity itself. One student jokes that the ship is writing in vapour. But every time they wipe the surface, clean new lines form elsewhere, curling like frost flowers, glowing faintly under ultraviolet light. By midday, the fog thickens until they can barely see the tents 10 metres and 33 feet away. The silence becomes oppressive. Even the sound of the generators seems swallowed. Somewhere in that white stillness, Emil swears he hears whispering again, soft syllables echoing between the ridges of the hull. The quirky tidbit arises when Hauksson discovers that one of the runic patterns, when traced onto mapping software, outlines a perfect spiral, matching the magnetic field lines of the northern aurora. "That can't be coincidence," he mutters. Solveig leans over his shoulder. "Unless they understood magnetism centuries before, we thought they did." Historians continue to argue whether Viking navigators truly used the mythical sunstone for orientation on cloudy days. Modern experiments with Iceland's spar show it can indeed detect the sun's position through polarization, allowing navigation even without a compass. But if these runes encode celestial data, it would mean the Norse had a system far more sophisticated than previously believed, a combination of navigation ritual and cosmic map. That afternoon, the team decides to laser scan the interior timbers, hoping to reveal engravings invisible to the eye. As the laser sweeps the wood, faint green light refracts through droplets of mist, painting the hull with shimmering veins. The screen fills with a lattice of hidden markings, some geometric, others almost biological, curling like veins of leaves. One image freezes everyone in place, a pair of overlapping circles forming a figure-8 pattern centered directly under the mainmast step. Solveig stares at it. "Infinity," she murmurs, or two worlds crossing. Emil frowns, or a warning not to cross. The scanner pings again, detecting an irregular density near the carved section. Beneath the outer planks lies a small cavity filled with hardened tar. After careful excavation, they extract a thin plank about 1 meter and 3 feet long. On it are deeply carved runes sharper and more deliberate than the mistborn lines outside. They clean it under controlled light, revealing an inscription. The linguist translates slowly, storm above, storm below. "We sailed where clouds drink the sea. The helmsman betrayed the oaths. The mountain took the ship. Everyone falls silent. The words feel less like history and more like confession. Betrayed the oaths," Solveig repeats. "Mutiny or blasphemy?" No one answers. The atmosphere in camp changes after that. Meals grow quieter. Even laughter feels forced. Some of the team start reporting dreams, cold seas, endless fog voices calling from beneath her ice. Emil wakes one night convinced he's heard oars again, rhythmic and distant. Haukson admits to dreaming of light falling upward. Solveig keeps her rationalist mask on, but her journal betrays unease. There's a pattern between these inscriptions, the artifacts and the environmental anomalies. The ship reacts to moisture, temperature and sound as if it's sensing us. Late one evening, the mist thickens once more, so dense it erases the horizon. The ship seems to float within it, suspended in grey nothingness. Solveig stands alone before the hull lamp held high. The frost glitters faintly on the carvings. For a moment she imagines the runes rearranging themselves, forming a message just for her. She blinks, and the mist shifts. The shapes have indeed changed. Not carved this time, but formed from condensation clear as ink, he hears. Solveig's breath catches, who she whispers aloud, half to herself, half to the mountain. There's no reply, only the groan of ice settling deep below. When dawn finally breaks, the mist dissipates in streaks of sunlight, leaving the hull bare once more. But when the team reviews the night's surveillance footage, the cameras show nothing unusual. No fog movement, no inscriptions. All except one frame, a single still image where faint glowing symbols encircle the ship's outline like a halo. "Light artifact," says Emil quickly, but even he doesn't sound convinced. As the team packs up for the day, Solveig glances one last time at the hull. For the first time she notices that the serpent emblem near the prow now looks different. Its mouth no longer bites its tail. Instead, the head is raised facing upward toward the mountain sky. She says nothing to the others. The next phase will take them deeper still into the buried stern compartment, where the last traces of the vanished crew await, and where science may no longer have the final word. The storm arrives without warning. One moment the sky's dull pewter. The next, it's as though the entire mountain exhales snow. White flurries spin in sheets, swallowing the tents and muting the hum of the generators. The archaeologists huddle in their shelters, lanterns flickering, while outside the ice dragon vanishes behind a veil of swirling frost. By evening the storm calms into a gentle fall of snowflakes as large as coins. The air is strangely still, almost reverent. Emil steps outside, first his breath forming clouds that hang in place before dissolving. The ship reappears slowly from the haze, its hull frosted over, glowing faintly beneath the aurora borealis that now ripples across the northern sky. The lights dance in ribbons of green and violet reflecting off the icy wood. For a moment everyone forgets the cold. Even Solveig, standing at the edge of the pit, feels her throat tighten. "It's as if the sky remembers them," she whispers. The mainstream historical fact Norse sailors believed the aurora borealis was the reflection of Valkyrie's armour, as they rode to escort fallen warriors to Valhalla. In some sagas, the lights were described as the breath of the dead, a bridge between worlds. But tonight the phenomenon feels closer than myth, like the air itself carries memory. Around the campfire, the team warms their hands while telling local tales. One of the porters, a Sami guide named Riston, leans forward. "My grandmother told of ships that sail the air," she says quietly. "When storms come, their oars creak in the clouds. They belong to those who never found home." Her voice carries softly through the night. Sometimes they bring gifts, fish, frozen in the snow tools buried near rivers. Other times they steal what they once lost: names, voices, warmth. She looks toward the ice dragon's silhouette. "Perhaps your ship still waits for its crew." A nervous laugh breaks the silence, but no one really dismisses her. The night feels heavier now, like the mountain itself is listening. The quirky tidbit occurs when the thermal imaging camera set to record overnight detects subtle heat signatures moving along the hull's interior. They trace the outline of human figures, 6 or 7 shapes faintly glowing within the ice, then fading again. Artifact from the storm insists Emil. Residual temperature from the generators, but the shapes appear only near midnight, and only for 47 seconds, long enough for one of the shapes to seem to turn its head toward the camera. Historians still quarrel over how far belief can influence perception. Some claim that isolation and fatigue can make even scientists imagine movement in stillness. Others argue that extraordinary finds sometimes bend the boundaries between mind and matter, that when humans touch something ancient enough, something ancient looks back. Solveig spends the next morning re-examining the carvings on the ship's side. Frost has formed new crystalline lines overnight, extending the existing runes, as if the cold itself were writing a continuation. Beneath one curved beam she finds a faint etching. She hadn't noticed before a human figure standing beneath a sky of waves holding a torch or staff. The figure faces upward toward a great arch that could be a rainbow, or the aurora itself. When photographed under ultraviolet light, the carving glows softly, revealing additional details. Dozens of tiny boat shapes floating above the arch, each with sails unfurled. Ships of the Sky whispers, "Riston." The next few nights grow stranger. The team begins hearing faint sounds drifting from the valley, like the creaking of wood and the splash of oars cutting water. But the fjord lies more than 100 kilometers and 60 miles away. Temperature inversion explains the meteorologist they contact by radio. Sound carries oddly in these conditions. No one argues, though the explanation feels paper thin. Emil records the ambient noise one night and plays it back later in the tent. Through the hiss of wind there's a rhythm. 4 beats. Pause. 4 beats. Identical to the echo pattern detected weeks earlier under the ice. He overlays the audio, aligning both sets of pulses. They match perfectly, separated by nearly 2,000 years of silence. The data fascinates Solveig but unsettles her. It's as if something is repeating itself, she muses, an echo that never stopped travelling. The aurora intensifies again that evening, cascading in colours so vivid it seems unreal. The snow reflects the green light, tinting everyone's faces an eerie hue. The ice dragon appears almost to float the air around it, shimmering like heat on water. Then faintly a scent drifts through, the camp tar and salt unmistakable, though no sea lies within sight or sound. Solveig feels her pulse quicken. She kneels beside the ship and places her hand on the wood. The surface is warm again, warmer than human skin. She pulls back quickly, breath clouding in the air. "The wood's thawing from the inside," she murmurs. Moments later, the snow around the hull begins to hiss softly as steam rises. The aurora flickers violently overhead, and for an instant everyone sees it. The faint silhouette of a long ship sails glowing, gliding silently through the northern lights. The image lasts no more than a heartbeat, but it leaves the air electric with awe. "Optical illusion," Emil says quickly, though his voice trembles. Riston crosses herself the old way, touching her forehead, lips and chest. They're looking for their way home. After the vision fades, the team gathers in uneasy silence. Solveig stares up at the aurora until her eyes sting. Ghosts or photons, she whispers, it doesn't matter. They're still here. She spends that night writing her notes, turning from science to something softer. The mountain holds echoes. Every sound, every light, every hope. Perhaps history isn't what we dig up, it's what refuses to stay buried. By morning the storm has passed, leaving the ship sheathed in clear ice. Beneath that glassy surface, faint silhouettes seem frozen mid-motion shapes, like men bending to oars, their faces half-formed eyes open. Whether shadows or tricks of refraction, no one can say. Solveig orders everyone to rest before continuing excavation, but she stays behind alone for a moment, tracing the outline of one figure with a gloved hand. The face seems almost kind, almost familiar. "You made it," she whispers to the frozen shape. "You really did." When she turns away, the fog curls briefly around the hull, and for an instant she hears laughter, not mocking but grateful. Then it fades, leaving only the creak of settling wood and the whisper of wind over snow. The mountain stands silent again, but something in the air feels lighter, like the ghosts of the northern sky have finally exhaled. By now the ice dragon no longer feels like an archaeological site. It feels like a presence, vast, patient, and quietly aware of every human breath that disturbs its ancient sleep. The once methodical dig has begun to feel more like a seance wrapped in science. Even the hum of the generators seems soft in our reverence somehow, as if the mountain has joined the team in listening. After the eerie night of the Aurora visions, Dr. Solveig Lund gathers her crew for a morning briefing inside the main tent. Her voice trembles slightly, not from fear but from exhaustion. "We proceed," she says, "but this time we record everything, every vibration, every temperature change, every whisper of air." No one jokes anymore. They simply nod, pulling on gloves and headlamps before stepping back into the snow-white light. The first task, drilling deeper cores beneath the hull to collect ice samples for chemical and microfossil analysis. The glaciologist Freya Nilsson kneels over the borehole, guiding a slender steel tube into the ice. As it rises again, she frowns. "There's salt," she murmurs. Solveig looks over. From the air, Freya shakes her head. "No, from seawater. The mainstream historical fact the Viking Age seas left distinct diatom species, microscopic plankton shells that fossilize in salt water. They are never found in solid alpine glaciers, because such glaciers form from compacted snow, not oceanic ice. Yet Freya's microscope reveals thousands of them, still glittering faintly like powdered glass. How does seawater get trapped in a mountain glacier, Emil asks. Freya exhales, fogging the eyepiece. Unless the glacier formed over an ancient marine deposit, which it didn't, it shouldn't be here at all. The finding sends a ripple through the camp. It suggests impossibly that the ship had once floated where now there is only rock. The phrase impossible is whispered so many times that it begins to lose its meaning. By midday, the ice core analysis yields more anomalies. The oxygen isotope ratios match seawater from the Norwegian coast, but they're mixed with particles of volcanic ash dating to roughly 940 CE, the year of Iceland's Eldjar eruption. So Emil says slowly this glacier somehow contains both the sea and fire. Solveig presses her fingers against her temple. Science, she murmurs, has a sense of humour. The quirky tidbit comes from Riston the Sami guide, who recalls a legend of a black snow that fell after the sky cracked open, a tale her ancestors told to explain ash drifting from far volcanoes. They said the gods burned the sea, she adds quietly. Meanwhile, the ship's interior begins to thaw faster than the surrounding ice. Sensors record a steady rise of 2 degrees Celsius and about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. Thermal imagery shows a faint luminescence inside the sealed stern compartment, a glow not visible to the naked eye. Solveig authorizes an endoscopic probe through a small gap between timbers. The camera slides into darkness, its lens glinting off droplets of condensation. Then something gleams back, a crystal sphere about the size of a fist resting in a nest of fabric. The surface pulses faintly with inner light like the reflection of lightning caught in glass. "Is it electrical?" Emil whispers. "It's buried under solid ice," Solveig answers. "Unless the gods installed batteries, I doubt it." When the probe touches the sphere, the camera feed flickers violently before cutting to static. The entire camp's power momentarily dips, generator lights dimming as though something has drawn energy straight from the system. Historians still argue whether technology and mysticism can coexist in the Viking worldview. The Norse saw no contradiction between practical navigation and divine influence. A sunstone was both instrument and charm, science and spell fused in one. But what lies inside this ship defies even that duality. They extract the sphere with painstaking care, placing it under a containment dome in the lab tent. Its surface is impossibly smooth, neither quartz nor glass. The spectrometer reads an unknown crystalline structure. When exposed to light, it refracts beams into precise geometric lattices, hexagons and spirals mimicking the runes on the hull. Solveig leans closer, mesmerized. "It's recording something," she says softly, or reflecting something that's still happening. The team watches as the crystal's inner glow pulses rhythmically, 4 beats. Pause, 4 beats, identical to the pattern of oars they've heard in audio recordings. Emil mutters, That's not coincidence anymore. For a while, no one speaks. The air hums faintly, a low resonance that makes their teeth vibrate. Instruments on the table tremble ever so slightly. Then, from outside, a muffled boom rolls across the valley, the deep sound of distant ice collapsing. Risson grips the table edge. They're answering. The glow fades, leaving the tent in silence. Solveig exhales slowly. No superstition, she insists, though her tone lacks conviction. Just physics. Freya gives a small wry smile. Then physics has a sense of humour too. That evening, Solveig begins writing a joint statement for the Norwegian Heritage Directorate. The wording becomes hesitant halfway through. We are no longer certain whether we are uncovering the past or awakening it. Outside, the wind rises, whispering through the valley like surf on distant shores. The aurora flickers again, green veils rippling overhead. The snow glows faintly blue from beneath, as if lit by some submerged ocean. Emil kneels and touches the ice. It's warm. He pulls his hand back, watching steam curl upward. It's breathing, he says softly. Solveig joins him, eyes fixed on the glowing drift. Then, let's hope it's dreaming, not remembering. That night, every thermometer in camp spikes briefly an impossible 20 degrees Celsius and 68 degrees Fahrenheit, above normal before plunging back into sub-zero cold. The data logs show no equipment malfunction. Something had radiated a single immense wave of warmth, as if the mountain's heart had just beaten once. When dawn breaks, the air smells faintly of salt again, and thin frost has reformed over every tent, tracing delicate spiral patterns identical to the mysterious runes. No one sleeps, no one speaks of miracles, but everyone knows the same truth: the ice dragon has crossed the border between science and something older, something watching. And just beneath its keel, radar picks up a new cavity, a hollow the exact size of a human body. The next morning, sunlight finally breaks through the overcast sky, glittering across the snow like powdered glass. The camp is silent except for the soft crunch of boots and the whisper of wind curling between the tents. The team moves slowly, exhausted from the strange heat wave of the previous night, each scientist clutching coffee as though it might tether them to reason. Dr. Solveig Lund reviews the radar scans on her laptop images that reveal the new hollow discovered beneath the ship's keel. The shape is too symmetrical to be natural, roughly 2 meters and 6.5 feet long, narrow at one end, widening at the shoulders. A body, unmistakably. Could be a void left by melting, Emil suggests half-heartedly. His voice lacks conviction. Solveig simply nods, or someone never made it off the ship. By midday, the team begins the delicate process of accessing the cavity. They tunnel carefully beneath the stern, melting ice layer by layer with low-heat steam. The air smells faintly metallic, laced with something older tar decay and pine sap. Every hiss of vapour feels like breath. At last the nozzle breaks into a small chamber. The steam clears, revealing something wrapped in what looks like animal hide darkened by centuries. The archaeologists exchange tense glances. Solveig kneels and brushes the surface with trembling fingers. Beneath the frost lies a curve of bone. The mainstream historical fact Viking burials often included entire ships with warriors interred alongside weapons, animals and treasures. But this is no mound, it's a mountaintop, and this burial is hidden under a keel, as though the person was entombed by the ship itself. They remove the hide, carefully exposing a partial skeleton curled in fetal position. The skull faces upward, mouth slightly open, as if gasping for air or for sky. Around the neck lies a braided cord of silver wire, from which hangs a disc of amber carved with an unfamiliar rune. When lifted to the light, it seems to shimmer with something like trapped fire. Emil whispers, "Is that?" Glowing, Solveig doesn't answer. She only watches as faint warmth radiates from the amber pendant, melting the frost on her gloves. Bone analysis later confirms the skeleton belongs to an adult male, likely in his 30s, tall and powerfully built. Traces of healed fractures mark the ribs and left arm a warrior's body. Yet the hands are delicate with calluses, not from sword hilts, but from rope or oar handles. The isotopic signatures in the teeth reveal a coastal diet: fish, salt, barley. A seafarer. The quirky tidbit emerges when Hauksson the linguist spots faint markings carved into the femur. Not tool marks, but letters, runes etched into the bone itself. They read, "Bound by oath, freed by sky." Solveig exhales shakily. They buried their helmsman under the ship, as an offering. Historians still argue whether such practices existed outside myth. The Ynglinga saga describes kings' sacrifice to the sea for failed voyages, and the Voluspa hints at sailors given to the wind to calm storms. But a burial beneath a vessel, especially one marooned on a mountain, is unprecedented. As they continue excavating more fragments, appear pieces of fabric, rusted metal buckles, and near the skull a wooden cup sealed by ice. Inside rests a residue of something black and crystalline. Chemical testing later reveals traces of iron oxide and sodium chloride sea salt. Seawater, says Freya, but concentrated as if boiled down. Solveig frowns. Maybe they carried seawater here on purpose. For a ritual. The fog returns by afternoon thicker than ever. It rolls down from the ridge, swallowing the camp in white. The air hums faintly, and the temperature drops sharply. Sensors flicker. Static crackles over the radios. Emil checks the readings. Magnetic interference again, he mutters. Then from within the mist comes a low creaking sound, the same rhythm they've heard for weeks. 4 beats. Pause. 4 beats. The sound of oars. Solveig steps closer to the ship. Flashlight beams slicing through the haze. The hull gleams wetly, and for a moment she swears she sees movement shadows shifting just beneath the frozen planks. They look like men rowing muscles, straining in silence. She blinks and the shapes vanish. Emil, she calls softly. Do you see that he joins her peers into the fog? Nothing he says, though his face has gone pale. But the microphones record it clearly. The creak of wood, the whisper of waves, and faint voices chanting in Old Norse Vida Himin Ha. We sail the heaven sea. The air pressure dips suddenly, causing ears to pop. Snow lifts from the ground in swirling eddies. Freya shouts from the tent, electromagnetic spike. Something's discharging energy like lightning but localized. Then silence. The storm dies as abruptly as it began. The fog thins, revealing the ship gleaming in eerie stillness. Except now along the deck, something new has appeared, shallow depressions in the frost footprints. Human-sized bear leading from the hull toward the ridge. Rissen crosses herself. They've gone walking. Solveig crouches beside one print touching its edge. The ice is melted beneath, not compressed. Not weight, she murmurs, heat. The footprints lead halfway up the slope before fading into nothing. The snow beyond is untouched, pristine. That night no one sleeps. The camp feels crowded, though. Only 8 humans remain. Emil sits awake by the monitors, replaying the audio again and again. Between the rhythmic oars and whispers, he notices something else, a heartbeat. Slow, steady, resonant, recorded by every microphone simultaneously. Not human, not mechanical, something vast. Solveig listens beside him. The pulse echoes like thunder underwater. It's coming from beneath us, she says. When dawn arrives, the body beneath the ship has vanished. The chamber lies empty, the amber pendant resting alone in the hollow. Its glow has faded, leaving only a faint scent of salt and smoke. The team stands in silence around the empty cavity. No one speaks. There are no signs of tampering, no prints, no disturbance, only smooth ice, as if the man simply melted into it. Solveig places the pendant in a specimen box, her hands trembling. We're shutting down tomorrow, she says, before the mountain takes any of us too. But as they pack equipment, the radar pings once more. A new void has appeared, this time beneath the scientist's own tent, human-sized again. Emil stares at the screen, then at Solveig. It's not finished, he whispers. The mountain groans softly, and somewhere far below the sound of waves rolls through the stone. Morning comes slowly wrapped in silver light. Snow drifts down in delicate spirals, each flake landing so gently it feels like the mountain is whispering secrets under its breath. The camp is quieter than ever. Half-packed crates lie open, laptops, powered-down tarps fluttering softly in the breeze. It feels less like an excavation now and more like the closing scene of a vigil. Dr. Solveig Lund stands at the edge of the site, staring at the ice dragon. Overnight, a fresh crust of frost has formed over the hull, sealing every seam, every rune, as if the mountain itself were reclaiming what had been borrowed. The ship looks peaceful again, no longer threatening, no longer glowing, simply ancient, timeless, and right where it was meant to be. Still, no one can explain what happened to the body beneath the keel, or the second void beneath the tent. Emil swears the ground had pulsed under his feet before dawn like something breathing deep within the glacier. Freya has packed up her instruments, muttering that she'll never trust a magnetometer again. Even Riston, usually stoic, refuses to stand too close to the ship now. It's done what it came to do, she says softly. Best to leave it dreaming. Solveig spends the morning taking final notes, her handwriting neat but slowing as she writes. Findings unrepeatable. conditions unstable, possible geothermal anomaly. She stops the pen hovering mid-air. The rational explanations have all collapsed beneath the weight of the impossible. She closes her notebook and walks toward the bow one last time. There, half buried in frost, she finds the serpent emblem. The amber eye, dim for days, now glows faintly once more. In that faint light she notices something she hadn't before. The serpent's tail doesn't loop back to its mouth anymore. Instead, it trails upward into a series of curling lines that resemble waves climbing the air. When mountains remember the sea, she thinks, maybe this is what it looks like. The mainstream historical fact remains clear: there is no recorded event, no glacial process, and no geological mechanism that could ever have lifted a Viking longship to this height. But the evidence, the oak hull, the salt residue, the diatoms, the cargo, refuses to fit any single theory. The more they measure, the less it obeys measurement. By noon, the team begins dismantling camp. The sun, low and white, burns through thin cloud, turning the snowfields into a mirror. As Solveig turns off the generator for the final time, silence floods the valley. It is a full, resonant silence, the kind that doesn't feel empty, but listening. She walks a little higher up the ridge for one last look at the site. From there the ice dragon appears smaller, its shadow merging with the rock beneath. Beyond it, the peaks of Jotunheimen stretch endlessly toward the horizon waves of stone frozen mid-surge. For the first time, she sees the landscape not as a mountain, but as an ancient ocean turned to ice. The quirky tidbit surfaces when Riston mentions a local myth. Every 1,000 years, when the aurora burns brightest, the sea returns to visit the mountains that once rose from its depths. The waves remember their children, she says quietly, and the ships that never found shore. Historians still dispute what became of the Ice Dragon expedition. Some later claim it was the result of a freak glacial landslide that lifted debris from an ancient fjord. Others propose a lost inland sea long evaporated. A few whisper that the mountains swallowed the ship, deliberately keeping it safe until humans could understand what it meant. No consensus has ever been reached. That evening, Solveig watches the sun slip below the ridge, the sky glowing in bands of orange and green. She feels both small and profoundly connected, one heartbeat, among countless layers of history pressing together. The air smells faintly of salt again, carried on a wind that has no business knowing the ocean. She whispers, almost without meaning to, "We found you." The wind answers with a long, low sigh that rolls through the valley. Beneath it faintly comes the rhythm of oars again, steady, measured like breathing. She closes her eyes, letting the sound carry her thoughts somewhere between wonder and surrender. When she opens them, the aurora has returned faint but wide, spreading like a luminous tide over the mountains. For a heartbeat, she thinks she sees movement within the light shapes of ships, sailing silently across the sky, their sails catching colour, their oars dipping into nothingness. Then the image dissolves into pure radiance. Solveig smiles, a small tired smile. "Sail well," she whispers, "wherever you're going." The ice dragon stands silent in its cradle of snow, its secret safe once more. As darkness deepens, the campfires fade one by one. Snow begins to fall again, covering footprints, tools and tracks. Within hours, the mountain looks untouched, its slopes smooth and pure. Only a faint line in the ice hints that something once stirred beneath it, something shaped like a ship, something that once knew the sea. And perhaps, just perhaps, still does. The story slows now, like breath settling after a long climb. Picture the mountains quiet under their blankets of snow, the northern sky fading from green to silver to soft darkness. The storm is gone, the air is still, and the ice dragon rests once again beneath its frozen shroud. Somewhere down in the valleys, the fjords lap gently against their shores, unaware that far above them lies a memory of their own, making a ship that once sailed the world below and now dreams among the clouds. Let your mind drift there for a moment. Imagine the sound of oars becoming waves and waves becoming wind, each rhythm folding into the next until you can't tell where sea ends and sky begins. The mountain exhales. The stars blink slowly awake. Everything ancient becomes quiet again. If there's a moral hidden in this frozen riddle, perhaps it's that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to keep us humble, to remind us that the earth is still full of wonder, and that sometimes history is less about facts than about listening to what time whispers through stone. So take one last slow breath, feel the stillness gather around you like snow on pine branches, and let yourself sink gently into the calm that follows curiosity. The oars have fallen silent, the ship has come to rest, and the sea, somewhere deep beneath the mountain, is dreaming you to sleep.